Thank you. Member for Forrest.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. $185 additional billion in the budget doesn't sound like restraint to me. So when we look at cost of living and the cost of doing business for small and family businesses, there's no doubt that inflation is a real issue for them every single day. When you look at the input costs constantly going up for small businesses in the same way they do for a family budget, but for the small businesses that have mortgaged their homes to buy businesses, the increases in interest rates hits them particularly hard. They're actually exhausted from what they had to do during COVID. If you're a small and family business, you know this well. There is a lack of workforce out there to help you in what you do at this moment. You're now working even longer hours simply to make ends meet because of those same labour shortages and the extra costs that are imposed on your business through high inflation. And we know it will be higher for longer because of this budget. And I was recently talking to Scott Lane, who is the co-founder and a director of Premalea, which is an accommodation and wellness venue in Yalling up in my electorate. Now, and this is as a small business, he's seeing around a 100% increase in his utilities costs, whether that's power, interest, gas, insurance. And he's supposed to keep running his business. And his customers cannot afford to pay any more for the services that he's providing. So he's either got to be able to absorb that as a business or go out of business. He's had a 34% increase in other operating costs in wages and consumables and an insurance cost that's gone from $6,000 to almost $30,000. So I went and spoke to a number of other small businesses that I've used as a litmus test throughout COVID and throughout my time to get a sense of how the local economy is running. And one of the areas that discretionary spending that's most affected by inflation and high interest rates and where people find themselves having to meet those significant extra costs in their mortgages is the discretionary spending in places like toy shops and retail sectors. But in the toy shop in the last week, that same owner of small business owner said that people are now only buying what they have to have for those times in the kids' lives that are most important. There's very little being spent in a discretionary sense. In the retail space, particularly in clothing, there's a real issue in women's clothing around the cooling in their market. In hospitalities, when I spoke to the cafes and the small restaurants, in the cafes they're finding that people have come back from possibly getting 2 or 3 perhaps coffees a day to 1 at best. And so if that's what your business is dependent on, there's some real issues for you with all your increases in costs. There's one business called Corners on the Bay, and I went and had a chat to them on Australia Day after the ceremony. How are you doing? And they said, well, the cost of everything in our business has gone up. The ingredients that we use for what we're putting on the tables has gone up so much that we are struggling to make ends meet. We're working longer hours ourselves, and in fact, we put up our prices, but the customer is struggling to manage this. And so that restaurant is no longer there. They shut. And as I said earlier, they're the options you have in small business. You either cut your costs. If you can pass your costs on to a consumer, that may be the case for some. As a dairy farmer, that's not something we get to do in our business. We have to absorb the extra costs of doing business. And when you look at things like fertiliser and energy and the increases in our costs of doing business, there is no way to pass that on. So that's where this small business found itself. I spoke to John Ablett at Featured Wood Gallery in Australind, and that's a tourism-type operation. He said it's just gone cold. And that's the word that keeps coming through. It's gone cold. And I spoke to some of my livestock transporters, and particularly in WA where we see those affected by the closing of the livestock export industry in WA. There's a significant impact on all of those businesses and every other small business in the community that depends on them. And they're the ones also absorbing these extra costs of doing business. and we've seen significant uncertainty created around the Aboriginal Heritage Act in WA for farmers and pastoralists. 600, I think, got together in Esperance and 400 in Merredin to talk about this. And we're not even going near pharmacists and what impact the government's changes will have on particularly those small regional and remote pharmacies. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Member for Bennelong.